I think people are starting to join. I will let the tech team correct me if it's not so. And we are ready to start today. So first and foremost, people who are here in attendance, very numerous people who are here in attendance, would you please use your earphones for listening to the to our panelists who are virtual? And now we can start. So first, so my name is Maria Sokolova, and I'm a trade and development expert. Welcome today to this Trade Experts panel on inclusion by example. Today we will not only guide you to the brilliance of our expertise, but also try to shine light on why women should be more included into the trade policy after COVID-19. So I have to tell you, this panel will not be like any other of the other panels that you've seen this week. It will still be talking about how trade is important for our lives, how some panels discuss the gender importance in trade. So we'll touch upon these. Our speakers will touch on such topics like e-commerce, COVID-19, trade negotiations, climate, but they will be doing it in a debate form, meaning that we will be having disagreeing, I hope we will be having disagreeing positions in our panel. And this is the first time we're doing this, and we hope this way we will let you more into discussions and diversity of opinions we have in these in this topic. So let's now quickly introduce our panelists. Maybe I should say competitors, because you're debaters. So the first panelist is connecting to us from Canada. It's Deborah Steger, and she's the Professor Emerita at the University of Ottawa Faculty of Law and Senior Fellow at the Center for International Governance Innovation and the C.D. Howe Institute. Amongst the vast legal legacy that Deborah has created in international trade law, she has also been first director of the Appellate Body Secretariat at the World Trade Organization. Hello, Deborah. Very happy to see you. So the second panelist is Alisa DiCaprio, head of trade and supply chain at blockchain conglomerate R3, connecting with us from the New York City. She holds a PhD from MIT and previously has worked in numerous international organizations on digital trade and trade financing and innovation. Her work directed to closing the gap for trade financing for women is very remarkable. So also hello, by the way. Yes, I'm gonna be waving to an empty room, but I know that my virtual speakers can see me. So Alcera Gomez Hanady is connecting with us from Mexico. In addition to working on trade issues in a global company, she saw a need for more inclusivity and sustainability in international trade. And after finding this need, she co-founded a think tank, which is now called Trade Tank MX. She's currently holding a title of the president and co-founder of this think tank. And thank you so much. And hello to Mexico. Vanessa Erogobo, she is here in presence. Oversees ITC's work on sustainable value chains and trade and gender. She leads 3 programs of ITC, where She Trades Initiative, Green to Compete, program that shapes ITC's strategy on trade and environmental sustainability, and also the 3rd program of trade and sustainable development. So together, this panel here and virtually combines 89 years of trade policy related work, 22 years in trade negotiations, 76 years of research, and 108 races run. So with this very important statement, I have to make a disclaimer that all opinions here that we are making here today are our personal, do not represent the institutions where we work in any in some way, yes, but like not in official way. So let's do a quick poll in our audience to understand what are the baseline for our among our audience regarding if there should be more women involved into trade policy making post COVID-19 for a more resilient recovery. I believe the poll should actually go live now for the participants. Yes, okay, it's live. You should be able to see it on your screens. And I would ask my in attendance if you can see the poll. No. Okay, there are some technical difficulties, unfortunately, that we're having. The poll should have appeared in the Zoom interface. Okay, so we will not know whether what was the baseline for our, I don't know, it's not appearing. It's written that it's active. I guess we will have to skip the poll. I would imagine that you already now know what is your position regarding whether more women should be involved into trade policy making post COVID-19 for a more resilient recovery. I will let you evaluate your experiences of this panel yourself and come up to a conclusion whether you've changed your opinion. Okay, so now I will let my panelists warm up a little bit before they get into the, hopefully, a very heated debate that we will observe today. So I will give an open floor to a short question, which I would like all of my panelists to answer me. The question is, what are you doing to represent change in trade policy? And I will ask Deborah to be the first one to respond to this question. What are you doing to represent change in trade policy?
Thank you very much. In the past, I have, I think my career really represents institution building. I've really worked hard to try to effect change in institution building. And some examples include my involvement as the lead negotiator for Canada on creating the World Trade Organization as an organization, the dispute settlement system of the WTO in the late 1980s and early 1990s. I became the first director of the Appellate Body Secretariat, as you mentioned, during its critical years, and helped create that institution. After I left the WTO, I became an academic, and I mentored and taught students and helped them to find their place in trade policy and law. And I led a number of research projects devoted to reform of the WTO and building and creating new free trade agreements like the Canada-EU CETA and other free trade agreements. That produced a book, Redesigning the WTO for the 21st Century, which came out in 2010, organized groups of ambassadors back then in Geneva to discuss reform of the WTO. As you can tell, it didn't really lead to much back then. They weren't really, it wasn't ripe for discussion in Geneva at that time. It's still a problem area. And now I am president of Trade Lab, which is a student group network of trade law clinics around the world. So those are the things I've done in the past that I'm doing currently.
Okay, so thank you so much. So Deborah is, as you can see from her intervention, a change in itself. She created various initiatives, led different negotiations, and mentored, I guess I can say hundreds, maybe we can actually aim for thousands of people all over the world, trade law students at the moment. So the next panelist who I would like to hear from would be Alyssa. So Alyssa, tell me, how do you represent change in trade policy?
Thank you, Maria. I think I come at this from two very different angles as a way to bring gender into the conversation in trade. So I think the first angle is really around data, right? Because to show that any kind of change is needed, you need information and you need data about that. So, one of the things that I've done is I started and for 5 years calculated the trade finance gap, which we were able to show that women engage with fintech and trade finance differently. Which was pretty interesting. A lot of my work also focuses on female business owners. They don't act like the general population, which is also super interesting. So I would say, the first thing is just data gathering and analysis. And then the second is simply, maybe closer to what Deborah was talking about, is just being a technologist, right, as my career. And, we know that in general, women are put in positions of influence and power during periods of crisis and disruption. And the disruption that we see from COVID, the disruption that we see from technology is really one of those times. So the door is kind of wide open for women to go in and to have more female representation in trade. And, I kind of do what I can to remind people that there is this green path to go forward. And so I hope that that's going to continue to produce change.
Thank you so much, Alyssa. From my side, I can say that the first time I met Alyssa in person, I felt that she changed my view about who can actually represent blockchain trade policy. Like, she came on stage and made a very powerful speech. So the next panelist, Alcira, would you please have a word on how you represent change in trade policy?
Sure. Gracias, María. Es un honor estar aquí con ustedes. Como mujer, como mexicana, como millennial, solo por hacer quizás una referencia un poco inadecuada a mi generación, este es precisamente un cuestionamiento que trato de reflexionar con frecuencia. Voy a cambiar a inglés. I'm going to switch to English now. Basically, I have grown up with the results of a Mexican context open to trade from the initiation of NAFTA in 1994. The first agreement linking two trade development economies with one which was not so much. If you look for the photos of that time, you will find the same type of people there, all men, and it's not bad. I know many male expert negotiators of that time. I admire them, I acknowledge their expertise, but as I grew up in my professional career, I didn't feel that represented. They weren't women like me. This brings me to what I've been doing for the past few years, trying to represent change of the perspective and the construction of trade policy in Mexico. In 2018, facing a disruptive global situation, we all remember the 2016 elections in the US and what came after. The former representative of Mexico to the WTO, Ambassador Fernando Mateo, created this negotiations program with a university in Mexico called El Colegio de Mexico and the Ministry of Economy. This program opened the doors to new generation of trade specialists. And there, I not only found that there were more millennials like me who were trade wonks, but also many of them were women. So together, as you mentioned, around with 20 other colleagues, we started this first Mexican think tank with young professionals specialized on trade called Trade Tank MX. And in the way we constitute ourselves and the way we make our decisions of our programs is based on principles of equality and non-discrimination. So for me, being able to have spaces where specialists can put on like these gender sensitive glasses is essential to shift towards a more inclusive and trade policy decision. That is one of the reasons also why I was joining Trade Experts recently, and I am happy to collaborate in their mission of shining a light on women and trade experts, because I think that is the way we will really make a change in trade policy.
Thank you so much, Alcira. Yes, indeed, the trade world has been very heavily men-dominated, but in recent years, we ourselves, Trade Express, we also represent the change in the trade world. And we are looking forward to more change in the trade world. But next, would Vanessa do me the honors and talk about how you represent change in trade policy?
Absolutely. Thank you, Maria. And lovely to see the room filling up. You don't know what you're missing if you're on screen. It's a fantastic audience. Thank you so much for coming all this way. We're not used to having to walk to these places. So last year at Geneva Trade Week, I first heard about the invisible gorilla experiment. And what that is, I don't know, have you heard of the invisible? Oh, you've heard of the invisible gorilla experiment. So what that is a group of people are asked to watch a video. There's 6 people in the video, 3 in black shirts, 3 in white shirts, and they are passing a ball amongst each other. And the subject, the people watching the video, have to keep track of how many times the ball is passed, and then report back at the end of watching the video. And during the video, a person dressed as a gorilla walks across the stage, thumping their chest and off the stage. At the end of the experiment, it's really interesting that less than half the people who are watching the video actually see this big gorilla walking across the stage. So I'm actually one of those I don't know, lucky or unfortunate people that sees the gorilla on this stage, and I see the gorilla in trade policy. And I've used this weird and special challenge to disrupt for good. I think that the scale of the change that's required to really place people and planet at the center of trade policy requires a big paradigm shift. And I've used that on gender. You know, in June 2015, I did a TEDx talk where I was sharing an idea about connecting 1 million women to markets. And today, that's the She Trades initiative. We played a really leading role in pushing forward the Buenos Aires Declaration with other partners and stakeholders. And, we're close to connecting 3 million women to market now. So this is the disrupt for good force that I bring to the trade policy arena.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. Yes, I do believe that Invisible Gorilla is a really good experiment, a thought experiment. I'm not sure if the gender data on this experiment was collected.
That would be a really interesting thing to look at, because perhaps a lot of the people that see the gorilla could be women. I don't know.
We don't know. That's
know.
why there should be more gender data in the world. And that's why there are various initiatives, including here at the WTO, on collecting more gender disaggregated data. So we need more of this gorilla sightings in the world to have a shift in trade policy. But today, we're going to have a shift on what an expert panel is. And now we're going to start the debate part of our panel. So before we actually head into the debate, let me explain the rules. The moderator, will give a statement to which my panelists, debaters can actually say, yes, I agree, or no, I disagree. So see, like Julius Caesar type of style, like let's experiment. Today, we're very happy to be here virtually and non-virtually in this room. My panelists are supposed, yes, okay. Today, we're very happy to be in this room. And if you agree, you raise your hand like this. If you disagree, you put it down, like so you're voting down. Okay, so once I see the position of my panelists, I will choose one person to debate for the yes and for the no side of the statement. And the debater will only have about 2 minutes to make points on why the 3 minutes to make a point why she is supporting this specific position. And the statements will be coming from all across your Twitter feed today. They will be touching on, as I mentioned, various topics. So let's start with the first one. Ready? Vanessa, don't peek. Yeah. So statement 1, COVID-19 created positive opportunities for women to engage into trade policy making. All panelists, would you please state your position to this statement? COVID-19 created positive opportunities for women to engage into trade policy making. Okay, so Alyssa is against, Elsira is against, Deborah, against, okay. Okay, I think we have the person who's gonna start debating. Vanessa, please, why are you agreeing with the statement?
Okay, because I see the gorilla, and look, the pandemic has been bad, and it's disproportionately affected women, that's for sure. But I think that at the same time, the pandemic has been a force for reckoning, for a critical mass of people, and has created the impetus to really rethink how we operate. And we can use this opportunity to rethink the power imbalances. We can use it to rethink existing norms. We can tear up the old rule book and we can create a new one. Leveraging crisis and disruption to create opportunity, it's not a new idea. World War I is often quoted as a very good example of when this happened and of changing norms, with millions of women with millions of men actually out to war. Women had to step in, and this is when they started manufacturing jobs and agricultural jobs, as well as working on the front line as doctors, as nurses, as drivers. And so I think that in this way, the pandemic and the crisis has created an opportunity for us to engage more in trade policy making. And one last one, we even see that online, the ability to do some of this work online also opens up opportunities, not just for women, but for voices who haven't been traditionally heard to be engaged in the debate.
Okay, so the yes camp started very strong, but we had a very enthusiastic no first. So Alyssa, you were the first one to do this. So would you please provide your arguments for why you think that COVID-19 did not create positive opportunities for women to engage into trade policy making?
Well, so now that I understand you are going with the first person to respond, I'm going to respond much more slowly for the next questions.
Oh, I may change the strategy. Like, I'm the moderator who can change it. Like, I can change the rules, so we'll see.
Oh God, a disaster already. Okay, well, so I agree with Vanessa's points that a crisis is a great opportunity, but and we should always leverage a crisis. But I just don't see this yet. I think that COVID certainly disrupted the world for everyone, for men and women and just everybody in general. But when from a technology point of view, which is kind of where I come from, there were two areas where we've seen changes coming out of COVID, right? And the first is this opportunity to reorganize logistics, and the second is the opportunity to kind of reorganize or update laws and regulations. Now, in the logistics space, I haven't seen any particular opportunities for women coming out of this. I haven't seen that at all. On the legal side, though, you do see some prominent women, in the UK, for example, who have really gotten involved and are pushing this need to update laws to allow for electronic documents or electronic instruments in ways that we didn't realize were important before COVID. But those women were there before COVID happened. And I think that they were strong voices even before that. So yeah, I mean, the reason I'm against this is because I think it was a disruption. I think it will change a lot of things going forward and potentially be an opportunity. But I think as of right now, I don't think that was particularly gendered. So that's why I didn't support this.
So I see Vanessa taking notes. So I think she has something to come back. The yes camp.
I think, Elisa, I will give you some, I agree with some of what you say, not all, because, I'll give you a specific example. Through the course of the pandemic, we managed to get through the first ever standards related agreement related to women's entrepreneurship. And we did all of that online, that we would never have had the opportunity to have, 350 voices representing the voice of women entrepreneurs from around the world sitting at the table to create this groundbreaking, it's called ISO International Workshop Agreement 34, that provides definitions and means of deploying those definitions on women's entrepreneurship, which is extremely crucial on the data front, because now we can actually count compare apples to apples, oranges to oranges when we talk about women's entrepreneurship. And that we wouldn't have been able to get, I think, such a robust win for women without having the opportunity to do this virtually.
That's a very good statement. And now with the more gender disaggregated data, we may also have more data on the invisible gorilla syndrome. That was not a syndrome, but it could be as well be. Okay, so I will actually move to the next statement, just in the interest of time. And the next statement, my dear panelists, would be more women should be involved into trade negotiations. More women should be involved into trade negotiations. Again, yes, if you agree, no, if you disagree. Deborah, you need to indicate whether you agree with this. Okay, you agree. Okay, so a bit higher up because we cannot, yeah, okay. So
I'm just going to disagree with whatever the rest of the panel says, I'll do the opposite.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to start with Deborah. Deborah, we need the very strong yes camp for this one.
Well, I think it's very important that more women become involved in trade negotiations. In the past, certainly in the distant past, there were very few involved, but the ones that were involved were, I found in my experience in the Uruguay round, were very effective. For example, they led and created small informal working groups in the dispute settlement negotiations. A Canadian colleague of mine led and created a group called the De La Paix Group of 13 countries, not including the European communities in the United States, that had a handful of women negotiators on it. But that group was very effective in pushing and promoting the dispute settlement negotiations and moving it forward. It involved Norway, Japan, and a number of other countries. It was a very important group. I know that in the Quad group, which is very important in the Uruguay round as well, on dispute settlement, the lead negotiator was a woman, and I was involved as well for Canada. And the two of us worked very, very effectively together. So, you know, that's just anecdotal experience, but I can tell you that there weren't big egos involved. We worked collaboratively together. We formed small groups and got papers and worked together. Another example I'll give you just is, and others have cited it too, is Christia Freeland, who was Canada's lead negotiator and minister during the CUSMA, the Canada-US Mexico agreement negotiations, and she was negotiating with USTR Bob Lighthizer. She obviously had a totally different personality from him. She's humble. She's you know, a listener and works behind the scenes, consulting and collaborating very effectively. She's worked with the premiers of the provinces, some of whom are very conservative, have very big egos, and they publicly all consider her a friend and know that they can work together with her very, very effectively. So I've seen it in action, and I think we need more women who can listen and work collegially involved in trade negotiations.
So indeed, Deborah's anecdotal experience may summarize is summarizing decades of trade policy development. And indeed, there is research that shows that women tend to be more collaborative. Okay, I cannot pronounce this word today. It's not the first time. So they are more collaborative in their approach and in how they come to a decision. So I'm very much looking forward to what our No camp has to say to this. Vanessa?
Well, what's the saying? An anecdote does not an evidence make. What's the saying? I can't remember the
I think it's anecdote is not a rule.
no, that's
No?
not the
Okay.
saying. So, but something along those lines. I think my question would be, why are we including why they need to include more women in negotiations? What's the goal? Is it because you want better outcomes for women? Is it because of fairness? Is it because we want better outcomes for everyone from the trade negotiation? And I think if I take the better outcome for women argument, scribbling away, more women at the table doesn't automatically translate quality being mainstream more effectively. And in any case, gender mainstreaming should be the responsibility of men, women, of everyone. And we shouldn't let everyone else off the hook just by putting more women at the table. Secondly, when I think about the fairness argument or the better outcomes for all argument, then for me, it's about diversity. It's about ensuring that not only women, but that more diverse voices are part of, have a seat at the negotiating table. We know that diverse teams lead to better results. And then third, I think we need to have more women in the kitchen if the goal is better outcomes for women. Prioritizing women in the consultations of trade policy and the consultations for trade agreements, I think arguably is more important than having more women negotiate at the table, because there you get the data, you get the evidence, you get this is what I need to bring to the table.
I think it was last year when I heard Arantxa Gonzalez making an example of WTO being a house. Now we're having an example of trade policy being household, where the rules are being done in the kitchen. And that's a very nice analogy, I think. So thank you so much for your against position. Deborah, would you like to come back at what, with additional arguments, or we can go to the next? Okay, Deborah?
No, I'd like to come back quickly. I was giving those anecdotes because I said there were few to think about in the past, but I was showing how women being involved both as leaders and as negotiators demonstrated that there could be effective decision making. And so I was talking more about the second point that Vanessa had talked about, that not only fairness, but also effective decision making. Because as she said, yes, if you want good decision making, you need diversity at the table. I agree with her wholeheartedly when it comes to diversity. However, with respect to diversity, I would point out that women are at least 50% of the population across all categories. So so in order to really be fair, we need to work toward having 50% or more women at the table and women in leadership positions, from my perspective.
Thank you so much. Yes. Okay. So we're gonna move to the next statement for the sake of time. And I remind my panelists, my debaterettes, to be snappy so that we can have as many statements gone through. She was not peeking. So next statement. Women will benefit from new technologies being applied in supply resilience. Yes or no? Women will benefit from new technologies being applied in supply chain resilience. Would you please state your opinion, my panelists? Okay. Yes, yes, no. Oh, okay. So, you're not the only one who's okay. This is new. I will let Alyssa start the pro position for this statement. Alyssa?
Great. I love technology questions. I'm very excited about this. So, I agree with this statement that women are going to benefit from new technologies for maybe an unconventional reason. The first is because a lot of these new technologies are automation. And this moves us away from the kind of old boys network that tends to dominate in supply chain logistics trade everywhere. The power of the old boys network is pretty strong. And this is kind of a lot of what we see in the data is that women haven't yet built up the same type of strong social network that men have in the business place. And so the automation removes this kind of need for back office ways to get things done. So I used to work at Asian Development Bank, right, which is a huge bank, very, very bureaucratic, many decades of bureaucracy being built on top of each other. And the way that we got things done was that you could either go through the regular process, which would take you months and months, or you could call your friend in that other department and mention that you needed some comments on a document, or maybe they could facilitate this loan going through. And that was the way things got done. And that works very, very well through the old boys network. Automation means you don't have to do that. It just automatically happens. So I think that's a big benefit. And the second benefit also comes out of the data. And this is that we know that women engage differently with fintech. And so part of these new technologies in supply chain are around supply chain finance, are around tracking the long tail of the supply chain. And this is really where women have struggled, because women-owned businesses tend to be more informal. They tend to have less capacity to fulfill some of the requirements. And so as these things become automated, as we have new types of instruments, this is going to benefit women entrepreneurs more than the general population. So this is kind of a few of the reasons that I'm really excited about this, but also why I think it's very different for women.
So thank you so much for being excited, first of all, and second of all, for providing your arguments for why women will benefit from new technologies being applied in supply chain resilience. If I remember correctly, yes, Deborah is already, yes. Deborah, would you please give your arguments against why this will not work?
Well, my position is a nuanced one. I see that there are potential opportunities, but I think that the barriers to financing and the problems with networking, et cetera, that Alyssa has pointed to must be removed first through government action and trade agreements, et cetera. There is currently, as we know, not a level playing field. Women participate in trade differently from men. And women entrepreneurs are not able to explore opportunities or to even develop their ability to trade because the barriers are just too high. They can't find financing, they can't innovate and scale up. So to suggest that just new technologies are going to allow them to do that all of a sudden, I think will not be enough, because they don't have financing currently in many countries, and they don't have the established networks, etc. So they really need government support and strong government support in their countries, and government policies and trade agreements can help that.
Alyssa, would you like to quickly get back on these arguments?
Sure, I would just say one thing. I completely agree that there's a need for government intervention. But what I would say is that, and yes, women struggle to access finance. We have the data to show that, but the data also shows that women are more intensive users of fintech when you're looking at finance. And so when I think about technologies for supply chain, I'm specifically thinking about fintech. So I think there is that, we don't know why that is, right? That data is not clear. So it could be very much that I'm kind of making the wrong assumption here, but I think it's an important point to bring up that Deborah made. They don't have access to finance, but they do use fintech more intensively.
Thank you so much. Okay, so you actually, okay, let's just continue to the next statement. If you, okay, go.
I have a proposal. Why don't you change that to women could benefit from new technologies? Just change the will for could. Then I think we all agree.
I could change the statement, but I can't anymore because the statement was the way it was. But indeed, like next time. Okay, so the next statement would be, and we've just heard about the importance of networking and platforms, so I think it's a very fitting statement right now at this moment. Women in trade need a dedicated platform to network. Women in trade need a dedicated platform to network. Yes and no. Ladies, all panelists, would you please indicate your positions? Okay. Alyssa, Deborah? Okay, Alyssa is undecided on this one, but I'm okay. Okay, so let me go with Alcera because we haven't heard her for a while. Alcera, would you please take the floor?
Yeah, sure. And actually, I think Alisa and Deborah touched a little bit on this. Well, women often face gender discrimination through gender bias misconceptions. We know that. For example, thinking that women are less able to work under pressure or that they have less time for learning and social networking. These biased views are nothing but obstacles that negatively affect the credibility of women in business and trade. There's this TV series called, I think, Mad Men that showcases the business culture at an advertising company around the late 1950s. I might seen just an episode, but this reminded me of kind of a traditional male-dominated network environment. And I found myself thinking that it's not really that far away from the scenarios that we have been involved. So we have to think about that. And women should find groups where they can relate and have role models to whom they can experience and somehow learn in the process to be able to jump faster from the learning curve. Actually, that is one thing that Trade Experts does. On the other hand, there's also something to be done at mixed, not only women groups, which is just having this horizontal perspective to promote gender inclusivity and, as Vanessa mentioned a while ago, just diversity in general.
Okay, and Vanessa, the very strong against campaigner against women in trade need a dedicated platform to network statement.
Do you know, I think you're feeling my positions more strongly because we're in the same room together. So I'm sure the other debaters are equally vociferous about their positions. Look, Althea, we're not in 1950 and we need to disrupt the status quo. We can't build around the biases and reinforce them. So more than a dedicated platform to network, I think we need to turn the existing networking structures into more inclusive networking structures. First of all, it broadens the number and the nature of contacts that women can make. Second, women who want to do some serious professional networking actually need to be in those traditional networks, because that's where decision makers are, that's where investors are, that's where buyers are. So this is where women need to be. And so, you know, instead of ghettoizing women in women-only networks, let's get in there and work together. And actually, that's what I really like about Trade Experts, because, you know, it's a women-centered network that includes everyone.
Hey, Maria, can I have a very quick comeback? 3
Sure.
seconds comeback. I will put a question on the table. Isn't She Trades a dedicated platform for women to network? But anyways, I agree with Vanessa. It's all about diversity.
Sorry.
Okay.
I mean,
Okay.
I have
Okay.
to answer.
The debate got heated up.
It's a woman-centered platform, so everyone can join. We invite everyone to come to the event, to whatever we're doing, but it's centered around women.
And it's true. Trade Experts also accept men who are willing to be. Actually, that sounds not too bad. Women who are centered around men who are centered around women. So yeah, doesn't sound too bad. I think we should actually make it our one of our campaigns. So we'll move to the next statement. Women business owners will benefit from openness of e-commerce. Women business owners will benefit from openness of e-commerce. All panelists, your position? Yes, no? No, yes, okay. Alcira, would you please go? Like that, okay, yeah, Alcira, would you please go on this one?
Yeah, sure. I mean, regarding trade policy, it is evident that in a way it has been, as I mentioned earlier, I think unilaterally biased against women. Although, for example, no country imposes direct tariffs to trade, there are real implicit biases that affect women differently. For example, mobile internet, a tool that has widely been used to buy and sell goods and services. There's actually this 2019 mobile gender gap report from GSMA, and I'm sorry, I don't want to disrupt any other data that Alisa might have, but what I recall reading from this report is that women are around 25, 23% less likely than men to use mobile internet. So what I want to say is that this openness and the access to different platforms through e-commerce should be beneficial for women, and through in marginal terms, through every individual that has been taken further apart from equality access.
Okay, and I think Alyssa, you have to actually take up the opposition to this one, given that also Alcira has mentioned that you having a slightly different information. Oh, Alyssa?
Well, I think, you know, I think everything that she said is correct. The reason that I disagree with this statement is I take issue with the term openness. I don't think openness of e-commerce is enough. So, I mean, as a marketing platform, it's been, you know, pretty good for women entrepreneurs, right? I mean, to some of the points that have been brought up earlier. But I think in this case, what we need is more specific, customized solutions that will enable women to benefit from e-commerce. I think simply having it is not enough. So yeah, that was kind of my main point against this.
Okay, for the sake of time, I would actually move now to, unless Alcira wants to get back on this one, we will move to the next. Okay, let's move to the closing statement of the panel. This, as I'm the moderator who doesn't formulate the statements very well, but I can change the statement. So I'll try to be very specific on this one. Trade should not work with the questions of gender, because trade policy is by definition gender blind and business oriented. I'll repeat, trade should not work with the questions of gender, because trade policy is by definition gender blind and business oriented. My panelists, would you please state your position? Okay. Oh, okay. Okay. I guess I can, I would also say this, by the way, but let's go and hear like opinions from our panel. Deborah, would you mind being the first one just to tell us why it's not true that trade should not work with the questions of gender?
Well, the OECD issued a report not that long ago in which they concluded that trade affects women differently than men in several ways. Women tend to play different roles in the global economy. Women are involved in services trade. As entrepreneurs, they're involved in MSMEs. They're differentially affected by trade and trade agreements. There's a whole host of reasons why trade affects women differently, and therefore gender really is a trade policy issue and a trade policy concern. So it's not true that trade is gender blind. It doesn't affect women, and it affects them differently from the way that it affects men because of the roles that women play as entrepreneurs, as workers, as consumers, etc., in the global economy.
Okay, Alyssa, I can see that your mic is already unmuted. So would you want to have a go on this one? I think I'm just going to go through all of you. So ladies, please prepare your answers, given that we have unanimity on this statement that trade policy is should work with the questions of gender because it's not gender blind and business oriented. Alyssa?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything Deborah said, right? I mean, trade is not gender blind. We know that, you know, female exporters engage differently. We know that, you know, with technology, with trade. And I think importantly, the reason that it can't do this is because what you want is to have the diversity of inputs as the greatest degree of diversity of inputs that you can possibly have, right? This is why, you know, the GATT process was so problematic, and the WTO process is seen as so much better, right? Because with GATT, you had kind of the closed negotiations between a few countries, and then they were like, great, there's global trade policy. But now you have many more voices in the room. It makes it more difficult, but it also means that the laws that you're creating and the regulations that you're creating and the policies that you're creating there's a lot more ownership from all of the different stakeholders. So I think it's really about, you know, diversity is incredibly important when you're talking about trade policy and negotiations.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to Vanessa.
So I'm going to be very brief. Trade is not about business. Trade is not about trade. We are in the home of trade, and the head of this home, the head of this household, Dr. Ngozi, she always says, if you listen to her speak, trade is about people. And that's why I think trade policy needs to deal with gender, with people, the impacts of trade on people. And it's that simple. The evidence tells us, you know, you've heard plenty of evidence that women are less likely to take advantage of trade, and the impacts of trade are different. So the real question is, why wouldn't we do anything about it when we can?
And we can. So, Alcira, yes, please.
Yeah, well, for me would be also a hard no. I mean, trade policy can be seen as gender neutral in the effects of its measure. For example, no tariff would be imposed because of someone's gender. We could discuss domestic pink taxes, but that's another thing. But more deeply, it cannot be blind to the origins and the effects of the impact that these policies have on different groups of people, such as women, just as Vanessa just stated. Policy and economic decisions shouldn't be blind to their production factors, and women as participants to the economy are part of these production factors. And I would like to end with kind of two examples of what would be something we should do and shouldn't do. Something that we shouldn't do is that just this week, I read a newspaper from the companies listed in the Mexican stock exchange market, and you will be amazed that only 9% of the board of directors are represented by women. That is like 190 from a bunch of men there. On the other hand, for example, in the UK, there's almost 40% on board of directors. So when you see the correlation to data on the OCDE, for example, of how much contribution private funds give to GDP, you see that in Mexico is less than 0.1%, while in the UK might be around 1.1 or 1%. So there's something there. More women should be on boards. On the good note, I have this close friend who just told me yesterday morning that about the negotiations on services, domestic regulations have reached an agreement in advance of the 12th ministerial coming up next November. But besides the basic technical issues, the text includes language of non-discriminatory between men and women in the context of the authorization of procedures for services suppliers. This is the first time such language has been included in a WTO negotiated outcome. And I think that it's exactly as taking again Vanessa's words, what Dr. Ngozo Kanduwela is trying to spread around this world with this inclusion by example.
Thank you so much, Alcira. Yes, so we're approaching the end of our panel. I do see one question from the audience about the specifically targeting women in LCD countries to be more included into trade dialogue. And I would not open it to my panelists, but I would advise like to check the International Trade Center programs, the WTO information, where there is a lot of information about women targeted programs. So let me close this panel by admitting one thing. Talking about trade and gender is hard. It's almost impossible. It's culturally sensitive, but it's more needed now than ever. The variety of opinions that you heard in this panel, the different positions that women trade experts have, exhibit how different and diverse women expertise can be. So inclusion of women into trade dialogue, into formation of different aspects of trade policy, inclusion of women trade experts into these discussions will benefit everyone, because you can see we disagree on everything because we're people, but except for one thing, that trade should not work with gender. Trade should be gender inclusive, and there should be specific targeting on that. So one thing is clear for me today is that, and I hope also for everyone who joined us here today physically or attended virtually, so I'm really grateful for you finding time for this, is that women trade experts are an incredible force of nature, and they are a force to be reckoned with and to be included into formation of trade policy. And I really hope that you have enjoyed today's panel, that you have enjoyed our debate panel on inclusion by example, the unique panel that we organized here at the WTO Public Forum for trade experts, the global network that exists to shine light on women trade experts. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Thank you so much for all my panelists. Please give a round of applause. Thank you. And that awkward moment when I don't know what to do because, yeah.